They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But for Catherine Vance it was served on a silver platter under the glittering chandeliers of her own Hamptons estate, with 200 of New York's elite as witnesses. She was the perfect wife to a self-made millionaire, a pillar of quiet elegance in a world of loud money. But when her husband Julian Croft raised a champagne flute to toast a new beginning, he wasn't toasting her. He was toasting his pregnant mistress. He thought it was a power move, the ultimate display of his invincibility. He didn't know that Catherine's smile was a war cry, and in her Hermes clutch she wasn't carrying lipstick. She was carrying his ruin. The air in the Hamptons in late August is different. It's thick with the scent of salt money and the quiet desperation of summer's end. For Catherine Vance it smelled of betrayal. For the past 6 weeks, that scent had been her constant companion, clinging to the silk sheets in her marital bed, mingling with the expensive perfume on her husband's collars, and tainting the taste of the morning espresso she no longer shared with him. Their life from the outside was an Instagram-perfect fantasy. The sprawling contemporary mansion in Southampton, a glass and cedar monolith overlooking the Atlantic, was featured in Architectural Digest. Julian Croft, her husband, was the golden boy of tech finance, a millionaire many times over by 35 with a jawline as sharp as his business acumen. He hadn't been born into money, but he'd acquired it with a ferocity that both terrified and thrilled the old money establishment. Catherine, daughter of a respected but not extravagantly wealthy history professor, was his perfect counterpart. Graceful, intelligent, and possessing an understated elegance that made the new money wives look garish. She ran their homes, the Hamptons estate, the Park Avenue penthouse, with the precision of a CEO. She chaired the galas, charmed the investors, and smoothed over Julian's occasional brutishness with a serene smile. She was as Vanity Fair had once gushed the velvet glove on Croft's iron fist. For 7 years the arrangement had worked. She had loved him, or at least she had loved the man she thought he was. The ambitious, charming visionary who had swept her off her feet. In return, she had believed he loved her, but the last year had seen a slow, creeping corrosion. The late nights at the office became more frequent. Business trips to Singapore or Zurich were extended by days with flimsy excuses. He grew distant, his eyes glazing over when she spoke of her day, his hand reflexively pulling away when she reached for it. The first concrete clue was a receipt. It fell out of his briefcase one morning as he rushed out a crisp slip from a boutique she'd never heard of, La Petite Nouveauté. It was a high-end maternity store in Soho. The purchase, a cashmere nursing shawl and a diamond-studded pacifier clip. The total was more than her father's monthly mortgage payment. Catherine felt the floor drop out from under her. They weren't trying for a baby. They hadn't been for years after a painful and private struggle with infertility that Julian had decreed they would no longer discuss. "We have a great life, Ellie," he'd said, his tone final. "Let's not complicate it." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. She knew. In that instant she knew everything and nothing. The stray blonde hairs on his jacket, the hushed phone calls he took on the terrace, the second phone he thought he'd hidden so cleverly in his gym bag. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to shatter the cold, perfect facade of their lives. But a deeper, colder instinct took over. The part of her that had watched her quiet, intellectual father be steamrolled by more aggressive colleagues her whole life. The part of her that had learned to navigate the shark-infested waters of New York society. That part whispered, "Not yet. Don't be emotional. Be smart." She called the only person she knew she could trust implicitly Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a partner at a white shoe law firm, a man whose quiet demeanor hid a mind like a steel trap. He had been her father's student at Columbia Law before he became a legal titan, and he'd always had a soft spot for Catherine, a paternal sort of protectiveness. They met in a discreet corner of the Carlyle's Bemelman's bar, the whimsical murals a stark contrast to the grimness of their conversation. Catherine laid it out, her voice low and steady, betraying none of the seismic terror she felt. The receipt. The second phone. The emotional distance. Marcus listened, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he took a slow sip of his Macallan. "Catherine," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What do you want?" "I don't know," she whispered, the first crack in her composure. "Yes, you do," he countered gently. "You want to know who she is. You want to know the extent of the damage, and then you want to decide whether to scorch the earth or walk away quietly. My advice: prepare for scorched earth. With a man like Julian, there's rarely another option." He was right. Quietly walking away was not in Julian's vocabulary, and it wouldn't be in hers either. He had made a fool of her. He had desecrated the private grief of their infertility. He had built a secret life on a foundation of her trust. She wouldn't just walk away. She would take a wrecking ball to the entire edifice. "How do we prepare?" she asked, her voice hardening. "You do nothing," Marcus instructed. "You be the perfect wife. You smile, you host, you attend. You give him no reason to suspect that you know anything. In the meantime, I will engage a private investigator. A very good, very discreet one. We need photos, names, dates. We need to document every dollar of marital assets he spent on this new venture." And so Catherine the actress was born. She played the part of her life. She welcomed Julian home with a kiss, ignoring the faint, unfamiliar floral scent on his skin. She asked about his day, feigning interest in mergers and acquisitions while her mind raced with images of him with another woman. It was a harrowing, soul-shredding performance. The investigator, a former Mossad agent named Ari, was ruthlessly efficient. Within 2 weeks, Catherine had a name and a face. Serafina Monet, a 26-year-old art gallery assistant from a modest background in Queens. She was beautiful in a way that was the polar opposite of Catherine's classic grace. She was all flowing blonde hair, bee-stung lips, and a palpable hungry ambition in her eyes. Ari's photos were a gallery of gut punches, Julian and Serafina laughing in Central Park, his hand resting proprietorially on her swollen belly, the two of them entering a lavishly furnished West Village apartment, an apartment Ari discovered that was owned by a shell corporation funded by a subsidiary of Croft Enterprises. He wasn't just having an affair. He had built her a life, a parallel life funded by their joint assets. Marcus was clinical. "This is good, Catherine. This is leverage. The apartment is a clear violation of the financial clauses in your prenuptial agreement. It constitutes a fraudulent transfer of marital property." The prenup. Another one of Julian's brilliant ideas, signed a week before their wedding. It was an ironclad document that, in the event of a divorce, would leave Catherine with a respectable but, by his standards, paltry sum. A thank you for her time. It was designed to protect his empire. But Marcus had found a hairline crack in it. The fidelity clause, often considered archaic, was something her father had insisted on including. It stated that in the case of proven adultery leading to the birth of a child, the financial penalties against Julian would be severe. But proving it in a way that would trigger the clause was the challenge. "He will bury us in litigation," Catherine said, looking at the photos of Serafina, who was now visibly heavily pregnant. "Let him try," Marcus said. "We just need the one perfect, undeniable moment of proof. Public acknowledgement is the gold standard." And then, as if delivered by the gods of vengeance themselves, Julian gave her that moment on a silver platter. He approached her one evening in the library of their Hamptons home. He was buzzing with an energy she hadn't seen directed at her in years. "Ellie, darling, I have a brilliant idea." He began pouring himself a brandy. "I want to host a party. End of summer. A real blowout. Here." Catherine kept her expression neutral. "Oh, what's the occasion?" "A celebration," he said, beaming. "A celebration of new beginnings. We just closed the Apex deal. It's a huge win. I want to toast the future of the company." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The Apex deal had closed 2 months ago. She looked at him at the practiced ease with which he lied to her face and felt a cold fury settle deep in her bones. She knew with chilling certainty what this party was really for. It was for her. It was a public coronation for his mistress. He was going to install her and their child into his life, and this party was the announcement. He was so arrogant, so convinced of her meek compliance that he was going to do it in their home. "A party," Catherine said, her voice smooth as glass. "What a wonderful idea, Julian. It should be a night no one will ever forget." His smile was triumphant. He had no idea how true her words would be. The planning began. Julian, for the first time, took an active interest. He wanted a marquee on the lawn, a jazz ensemble from the city, and catering by Jean-Georges. He insisted on a specific theme: new beginnings. He personally curated the guest list, a who's who of their world. Investors, rival society columnists, and the matriarchs who ruled the social scene. And he told her with a casualness that was almost comical he was inviting a few rising stars from the art world. "A new artist I'm thinking of patronizing," he'd said. "Serafina Monet. I think you'll like her." Catherine just smiled. "I can't wait to meet her." In the 2 weeks leading up to the party, Catherine didn't just play the part of the perfect hostess. She became a general planning a war. She and Marcus worked in secret late-night calls and encrypted emails, their new normal. Marcus filed the initial divorce petition to be held and served at the exact right moment. He hired a process server, a discreet man who would be disguised as one of the catering staff. They prepared the financial statements, the investigators' reports, the evidence of the shell corporation. It was a mountain of betrayal condensed into a single lethal legal document. Catherine also made a call to a name in her contacts list she hadn't used in years. Harrison Blake, the most feared and respected public relations specialist in New York, a man known for his ability to craft or destroy a narrative. She met him for a clandestine coffee and told him everything. He listened, a predatory glint in his eye. "So," he'd said, "you don't just want to divorce him. You want to utterly dismantle him, publicly. I like it. It's got style." On the day of the party, a strange calm descended upon Catherine. She spent the afternoon at a spa, not for relaxation, but for armor. Her hair was swept into a chignon so severe it was a statement. Her makeup was flawless, her red lipstick a slash of defiance. She chose her dress with surgical precision, a sleek column gown of midnight blue Tom Ford silk. It was beautiful but severe. It was not the dress of a happy wife. It was the dress of a woman going into battle. As she stood before the mirror, she saw not the trembling, heartbroken woman she had been 6 weeks ago, but a stranger she was coming to admire. This woman was cold, focused, and unbreakable. Julian Croft had intended to humiliate her. He was about to learn what a fatal miscalculation that was. He had forged his wife in the fire of his own betrayal, and now she was coming to collect. The marquee was a cathedral of white canvas and fairy lights on the vast emerald lawn, the Atlantic sighing in the distance. Inside, the air hummed with the sound of 200 of New York's most powerful people trying to out-talk, out-laugh, and outshine one another. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved like ghosts through the crowd, their silver trays laden with flutes of Dom Perignon and canapés that were miniature works of art. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, a smooth, decadent soundtrack for the unfolding drama. Catherine moved through the party with the practiced grace of a queen in her court. She greeted guests with a warm smile and a light touch on the arm, her Tom Ford gown shimmering under the soft lights. People complimented her on the magnificent party, on her home, on her impeccable taste. "You've outdone yourself, Catherine," gushed Blythe Carrington, a society doyen whose approval could make or break a social season. "Julian must be so proud. He's a man worth celebrating." Catherine replied, her voice smooth as silk, a hint of double meaning in her words that no one could possibly detect. She saw Julian across the lawn holding court. He was in his element, a magnate at the peak of his power. He wore a custom Brioni suit, his Patek Philippe watch catching the light. He was laughing, a booming, confident sound that always grated on her nerves. And standing just a little too close to him, bathed in his glow, was Serafina Monet. She was exactly as she was in the photographs, but more vivid, more real. She wore a flowing white empire waist dress that did little to conceal her advanced pregnancy. Her blonde hair was a halo around her face, and she looked up at Julian with an expression of pure adoration. She was touching his arm, her hand resting there for a second longer than was appropriate. A few people noticed. Catherine saw the flicker of a glance between two rival hedge fund managers, the slight knowing smirk on a gossip columnist's face. The whispers were already starting. Catherine's heart gave a painful lurch, but she willed it into submission. Stick to the plan, she told herself. Let him do it. Let him hang himself. She caught the eye of the process server, a man named Frank, who was impeccably disguised as a senior waiter, his posture perfect, a white napkin draped over his arm. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He was in position. Marcus Thorne. Her lawyer was not present but was on standby a short drive away waiting for her call. Harrison Blake, the PR guru, had already drafted the press release that would be sent to every major news outlet the second she gave the word. The pieces were all in place. An hour into the party, Julian stepped onto the small stage where the band was playing and tapped a crystal glass with a spoon. The chatter slowly died down as the crowd turned their attention to him. He was beaming, his face flushed with champagne and triumph. "Friends, colleagues, thank you all for coming," he began, his voice booming through the microphone. "I know the invitation said this was to celebrate the Apex deal, and it is. It's a testament to the hard work of my incredible team." He paused for a smattering of polite applause. Catherine stood near the front, her expression a perfect mask of wifely pride. She could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on them, the power couple, the hosts of this perfect evening. But tonight, Julian continued, his voice taking on a more intimate, more emotional tone, is about more than just business. It's about the future. It's about new beginnings. His eyes scanned the crowd moving past Catherine without a flicker of recognition and landed squarely on Serafina Monet. A collective silent intake of breath seemed to ripple through the marquee. The whispers grew louder. This was it. "Sometimes in life you make plans," Julian said, his gaze locked with his mistress's. "You build something, you think you know what your path is. And then something or someone comes along and shows you a new path. A more authentic one. A path towards true happiness and legacy." Catherine felt a cold, sharp calm settle over her. He was actually doing it. His arrogance was truly boundless. He was about to announce his affair and his illegitimate child in front of everyone who mattered in their world in her home. "I've learned that you have to be bold to get what you want in this life," he went on, raising his glass. "You have to be willing to tear down old structures to build something more beautiful and more meaningful." He was looking directly at Catherine now, a glint of challenge in his eyes. It was a public dismissal. He was tearing down their marriage right here, right now. "So I want to propose a toast," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Not just to a new deal, but to a new life. To my new beginning. To the future mother of my child. To Serafina." He raised his glass high. Serafina, standing by the stage, had tears in her eyes. She placed a hand on her swollen belly, looking radiant and victorious. A stunned, deafening silence fell over the party. The jazz trio faltered. No one moved. No one clinked their glass. They just stared, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and for some cruel delight. They looked from Julian to the pregnant blonde, and then as one, their heads turned to the wronged wife. They turned to Catherine. They expected to see her crumble. They expected tears, a panicked retreat, a scene. They were disappointed. Catherine did not move a muscle. She held her serene smile, though it was now edged with ice. She let the silence stretch, letting the full weight of Julian's social suicide settle over the crowd. She let them absorb the sheer naked audacity of it. Then, with the calm, deliberate grace that had defined her for 7 years, she placed her untouched champagne flute on a passing waiter's tray. She walked towards the stage. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. Julian watched her approach, a flicker of uncertainty finally entering his eyes. He hadn't expected this. He had expected her to flee in humiliation. She reached the stage and took the microphone from his hand. He let her take it, a confused look on his face. She turned to the stunned audience. "Thank you, Julian. she said, her voice clear and resonant, carrying to every corner of the tent. There was no tremor, no hint of tears. Only a chilling, absolute control. That was quite the announcement. It takes a special kind of man to celebrate his future by demolishing his past so publicly. A nervous titter went through the crowd. "You're right," she continued, her eyes finding his. "Tonight is indeed about new beginnings. It's about tearing down old rotten structures to build something better." She gave the slightest, most subtle nod to her left. Frank, the process server, began to move. He walked with purpose, weaving through the frozen statues of the 1%, his path clear towards the stage. "You spoke of your new beginning, Julian," Catherine said, her voice dropping a little lower, drawing everyone in. "And I believe every person deserves that. Which is why I wanted to give you yours right here, right now, in front of all the people whose opinions you value so much." Frank had reached the stage. He stood beside a stunned Julian, holding a thick manila envelope. Catherine's eyes, cold and bright, locked onto her husband's. "My new beginning starts tonight. It starts with telling the truth. And it starts with this." She turned from the microphone and looked at Julian. "Julian Croft," she said, her voice now devoid of all warmth, "you've been served." Frank stepped forward and placed the envelope squarely in Julian's hand. The words, "Summons and Complaint Dissolution of Marriage," were visible on the front. A collective gasp swept the marquee. It was a sound Catherine would cherish for the rest of her life. Julian stared at the papers in his hand as if they were a snake. The color drained from his face. His jaw, that famous sharp jawline, went slack. He looked from the papers to Catherine, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Serafina let out a small, horrified cry. Her moment of triumph had curdled into a nightmare. Catherine leaned back towards the microphone for her final words to the captivated audience. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her smile finally reaching her eyes. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. "Please enjoy the rest of the party. I believe I paid for it." And with that she turned, descended the steps of the stage, and walked, not ran, through the stunned, silent crowd. She didn't look back. She walked out of the marquee, out of her home, and out of the life that had been a beautiful, gilded cage. The salt-scented air of the Hamptons had never smelled so sweet. It smelled finally of freedom. The aftermath of the toast was not a quiet fallout. It was a nuclear explosion in the closed, gossipy ecosystem of New York's elite. Before Catherine's car had even reached the Long Island Expressway, Harrison Blake's press release had hit the inboxes of every journalist, from the New York Post's Page 6 to the Wall Street Journal. The headline was a masterpiece of controlled demolition. Catherine Vance files for divorce amidst husband Julian Croft's shocking baby shower announcement for Mistress. It wasn't just a story about infidelity. It was a story about power, hubris, and a wife who had refused to be a victim. Catherine was painted not as a scorned woman, but as a strategic genius. The narrative was hers. Julian was trapped. By publicly acknowledging Serafina and the child, he had handed Marcus Thorne the silver bullet they needed. The fidelity clause in the prenup was now a ticking time bomb set to detonate under his financial empire. The first few days were a blur of frantic, furious phone calls from Julian. They went straight to a new number Catherine had, one only Marcus and a few others possessed. His voicemails were a case study in narcissistic rage, cycling through disbelief threats, and then most pathetically desperate pleading. "Ellie, pick up the phone. You don't know what you're doing. You're destroying everything. You think you can pull this stunt and get away with it? I will bury you in court for years, Catherine. You will not see a dime more than what that prenup says." Okay, I messed up. It was a mistake. But we can fix this. We can be smart. Don't let these lawyers poison you against me. It's us, Ellie. It's always been us." Catherine listened to them, once a detached curiosity on her face, then deleted them. The us he spoke of had been a fiction, and she was done with his stories. Their war room was a sleek, soundproofed conference room in Marcus Thorne's midtown office, overlooking the spires of St. Patrick's Cathedral. The table was covered in documents, financial disclosures, bank statements, and the meticulously detailed report from Ari, the private investigator. He's panicking, Marcus said, pointing to a series of panicked stock transfers Julian had made in the 48 hours following the party. He's trying to move assets, hide them in offshore accounts and complex trusts. He's acting like a common criminal. Isn't he? Catherine asked, her voice dry. Legally, he's just being stupid, Marcus replied with a thin smile. Every transaction creates a digital footprint. He's so used to people being afraid of him that he's forgotten how to be careful. His arrogance is our greatest asset. Julian's legal team, a pack of snarling corporate litigators from a firm known for its scorched earth tactics, requested a settlement meeting. They met in a neutral location, a conference center that felt as sterile as a hospital. Julian was there looking haggard. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, coiled anger. His lead attorney, a slick man named Richard Sterling, laid out their offer. It was the exact amount stipulated in the original prenup. "This is a generous offer, Catherine," Sterling said condescendingly. "It allows you to walk away with dignity and avoid a long, unpleasant public battle." Catherine didn't even look at him. She looked directly at her husband. "Dignity?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You want to talk about dignity after what you did in our home?" Julian flinched. Marcus took over, his tone calm and professorial. "Richard, let's dispense with the theater. Your client, on a microphone in front of 200 witnesses, publicly acknowledged an affair that resulted in a child. This action triggers Section 11, subsection B of the prenuptial agreement, the infidelity clause. As such, the financial limitations of the agreement are rendered null and void. My client is entitled to 50% of all marital assets accumulated during their 7-year marriage." Sterling laughed, a short barking sound. "That's absurd. We will argue that Ms. Vance was aware of the relationship, that her actions at the party were a calculated, malicious act designed to inflict maximum damage. We will depose every friend, every staff member. We will paint her as a vindictive gold digger." "Go ahead," Catherine said, speaking for herself again. Her calmness was more unnerving than any outburst. "Depose my friends who listened to me cry about my husband's sudden business trips. Depose the staff who cleaned up the unfamiliar lipstick from his shirts. Depose the driver who dropped him off not at his office but at a West Village apartment building twice a week. And while you're at it, be sure to get a deposition from Serafina Monet. I'd love to hear her account of how my husband used funds from our joint accounts to pay her rent and buy her diamond pacifier clips." The room went silent. Julian stared at her, a dawning horror in his eyes. He had drastically underestimated her. He had seen her as a beautiful passive accessory to his life. He had never, not once, considered that she was paying attention. The meeting ended without a resolution, but a clear line had been drawn in the sand. The next front in the war opened as expected, with Genevieve Croft, Julian's formidable mother. A woman carved from New England granite and old money. Genevieve cared about only one thing: the Croft family legacy. A messy public divorce was a stain on that legacy. She summoned Catherine to her cavernous, dimly lit apartment on the Upper East Side, a museum of ancestral portraits and suffocating tradition. "Catherine," she began without any preamble, "this foolishness has gone on long enough. You've made your point. You embarrassed Julian. Now it's time to be sensible." "Sensible?" Catherine asked, refusing the tea that was offered. "Was it sensible for your son to impregnate his assistant and announce it at a party in my home?" Genevieve waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelets clattering. "Julian is a man. Men are weak. They make mistakes. But the family, the name, that is what endures. This public spectacle you've created is damaging his business. It's damaging our name." "He created the spectacle," Catherine corrected her calmly. "I simply ended the performance." Genevieve's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" "What I am owed," Catherine said. "Justice." "Justice is a concept for poets." Genevieve sniffed. "I am talking about money. Name your price. I will write you a check myself to make this go away. Sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear gracefully." It was the ultimate insult. She was being treated like another one of Julian's mistresses, a problem to be paid off and discarded. The quiet professor's daughter in her rose again, but this time she was armed with fury. "With all due respect, Genevieve, you don't have enough money to buy my silence," Catherine said, rising from her chair. "Your son broke something and he's going to pay to fix it. Not you. Him. The name you're so worried about? He tarnished it. I'm just polishing my own." She walked out, leaving the Croft matriarch speechless for what was likely the first time in her 70 years. The battle raged on for weeks, a war of attrition fought through legal motions and discovery requests. Julian's team tried to bury them in paperwork demanding years of Catherine's personal credit card statements, her emails, her text messages, searching for any hint of indiscretion on her part. They found nothing. Catherine's life had been an open book. Her only secret had been her growing sorrow. Meanwhile, a new unexpected player was growing restless, Serafina Monet. The fairy tale Julian had promised her had vanished. The triumphant entry into society had turned into a public shaming. She was no longer the radiant mother-to-be. She was the homewrecker in a tabloid scandal. Julian, consumed by his legal battles and cratering reputation, was becoming distant and irritable. The funding for her lavish lifestyle began to dry up as his accounts were frozen and scrutinized. The West Village apartment suddenly felt less like a love nest and more like a gilded cage, much like the one Catherine had just escaped. Serafina was young and ambitious, but she wasn't stupid. She saw that Julian was a sinking ship, and she and her unborn child were tied to his ankle. She started to think about her own future, and she realized her greatest leverage wasn't with Julian, but potentially with his wife. One evening, Marcus Thorne received a call from a blocked number. "Is this Marcus Thorne, Catherine Vance's lawyer?" a young woman's voice asked, hesitant and nervous. "It is. To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Serafina Monet," the voice said, and Marcus almost dropped the phone. I think we need to talk." It was the twist neither he nor Catherine had seen coming. The mistress was about to become their star witness. The war was about to take a decisive and devastating turn. The designated meeting place was a grand suite at the Mandarin Oriental, a bastion of impersonal luxury high above Columbus Circle. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Central Park, but the panorama of autumn foliage felt distant and unreal. Inside the suite, the air was thick with a sterile, climate-controlled tension. Catherine sat on a plush velvet sofa, a cup of untouched tea cooling on the marble table before her. She was a statue of composure in a tailored Roland Mouret dress, but her mind was a whirlwind. Meeting the woman who had lived in the shadow of her marriage felt like a necessary yet deeply violating step. It was one thing to see photos, another to breathe the same air. Marcus Thorne stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his presence a calming, solid anchor in the room. "Remember, Catherine," he said, his voice a low murmur that didn't carry. "She is not your enemy today. She is a tool, a desperate one, and desperate tools can be the most effective." Catherine nodded, her gaze fixed on the door. "I know, Marcus, but it's difficult to separate the tool from the woman who slept with my husband." Before he could reply, a soft knock echoed. A hotel staff member opened the door to admit a figure swathed in a Burberry scarf and oversized Chanel sunglasses. Serafina Monet entered the room hesitantly, her high-fashion armor doing little to conceal her vulnerability. She was visibly more pregnant than before, and the confident radiance she'd displayed at the party had been extinguished, replaced by a pallor of exhaustion and fear. Her eyes darted around the opulent suite before landing on Catherine, and she visibly recoiled a small involuntary step back. I didn't know you would be here," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, a protective gesture. Catherine rose, not out of courtesy, but to meet her on equal footing. She felt a strange cold detachment. This wasn't the vixen from the photographs. This was a frightened girl who had placed a bad bet. "My life is being dismantled, Ms. Monet," Catherine stated, her tone glacial but even. "I find it's best to be present for the demolition. Please sit." Serafina perched nervously on the edge of an armchair, her designer handbag clutched in her lap like a life raft. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable until Marcus stepped forward, his professional demeanor cutting through the personal animosity. "Ms. Monet," he began gently, "you called us. You said you needed to talk. We're here to listen." Tears welled in Serafina's eyes, and she fought to keep them from spilling. "He's abandoned me," she said, the words a raw, broken confession. "Since the party, everything changed. The calls stopped. The money." He said his lawyers advised him to cease all contact and support that every dollar could be used against him. "He called me a liability. Last week I received an eviction notice for the apartment. He promised me a life of family. He said our son would carry the Croft name with pride." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Now he calls me a complication he has to manage." Catherine listened unmoved. Every word was a confirmation of the man she now knew Julian to be. He didn't build things, he acquired them. And when they ceased to be valuable or became inconvenient, he discarded them. She and Serafina were in that moment simply different models of the same disposable commodity. "He's a coward," Catherine said, the words flat and factual. "He's a coward who hides behind his money. But that doesn't answer our question. What do you want from us?" Serafina's fear hardened into something new resolve. She had been pushed to the edge, and now she was ready to push back. "I want to secure my son's future, a future that Julian is trying to erase. And I want to make sure he can never hold his promises over another woman's head again." She paused, taking a deep breath. "In return, I will give you the weapon you need to destroy him." With trembling hands, she opened her handbag. She didn't just pull out the burner phone and the ledger. She placed them on the table with the deliberate finality of a confession. The phone was a sleek, anonymous black rectangle. The ledger was bound in dark green leather, looking deceptively ordinary. "This phone," she began, pushing it forward, "is where he let his guard down. He thought it was untraceable. He sent hundreds of texts. He detailed his plans to leave you after the baby was born. He complained about the financial gymnastics required to fund my life without you noticing. He named accounts, he mentioned transfers. It's all there." Catherine's stomach clenched, but her face remained a mask. It was one thing to know, another to see the sordid details spelled out in her husband's own words. "And this," Serafina said, her hand resting on the green leather ledger, "is his pride and his folly." She looked directly at Catherine. "He showed it to me one night after a bottle of very expensive wine. He was trying to impress me, to show me how much more powerful he was than anyone knew. He called it his Bible, his shadow ledger. It's a handwritten record of every asset he's hidden from you, from his company, from the IRS. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, real estate in names that don't exist. A cryptocurrency wallet he bragged was purer than gold. He said it was his real empire, the one the world could never touch." Marcus picked up the ledger, his movements precise. He opened it, his eyes scanning the neat columns of Julian's arrogant script. A low whistle escaped his lips. He looked up first at Serafina, then at Catherine, and in his gaze Catherine saw the entire landscape of the warshift. This wasn't just a bigger gun. It was a nuclear code. "This isn't just leverage, Catherine," Marcus said, his voice charged with a new lethal intensity. "This is a kill shot. The infidelity clause would have cost him a fortune. This is proof of systemic long-term financial fraud and perjury. He signed financial disclosures in your divorce proceedings, swearing under oath that he had revealed all his assets. This ledger proves he is a liar and a felon. If this is authenticated and Ms. Monet testifies to its origin, he won't just lose the divorce case. He'll face a federal investigation. He could go to prison." The weight of the ledger on the table seemed to suck all the air out of the room. This went beyond marital betrayal into a realm of criminality that could utterly annihilate the man Julian Croft presented to the world. Catherine's gaze fell on Serafina, who looked pale but resolute. "Why?" Catherine asked the question softer this time, colored with a grim curiosity. "Why give us this? You could have used it to blackmail him yourself." Serafina shook her head, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. Blackmail would keep me tied to him forever, waiting for the next check, living in fear. I don't want his money that way. I want freedom. For me and for my son. He used me to wound you. He planned to use our child as a pawn in his dynasty. But my son will not be a tool for a man like that. He will be safe. That is all I want. The raw sincerity in her voice was undeniable. She was not an ally, but her goals had aligned perfectly with Catherine's. An agreement was drawn up by Marcus right there in the suite. It was not a payoff. It was a carefully structured legal document creating an irrevocable trust for the benefit of baby boy Monet. The funds would be substantial enough for education and a secure start in life, managed by a neutral third-party bank and inaccessible to both Serafina and Julian. In exchange, Serafina would turn over all evidence and provide a sworn affidavit attesting to its authenticity, ready to testify if needed. She signed her name with a hand that was finally steady. Her war was over. Catherine's was about to reach its endgame. The final settlement meeting felt like the prelude to an execution. Julian arrived with his lawyer, Richard Sterling, attempting to project an air of weary impatience, as if Catherine's persistence was merely a nuisance. He had lost weight, and the dark circles under his eyes were not well concealed by concealer. He refused to look at Catherine. "Let's get this over with." Sterling began sliding the same old offer across the polished mahogany table. "This is our final offer. Take it or we'll see you in court for the next 5 years. Marcus Thorne let the offer sit there untouched. He smiled a thin, chilling expression. "Richard, I appreciate your commitment to theatrics, but the show is over." He reached into his own leather briefcase and produced a single high-quality photocopy. He didn't slide it. He placed it gently in the center of the table. It was a page from the Shadow Ledger, the one detailing a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands named JEC Holdings. Julian Catherine Croft, with a valuation of over $30 million in bearer bonds and property. Julian's handwriting was as clear as day. Julian's eyes fell to the paper. The change was instantaneous and catastrophic. The blood drained from his face, leaving a waxy gray sheen. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. He stared at the page as if it were a venomous snake, his carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. His gaze shot up wild and panicked, not to Marcus, but to Catherine. The question was in his eyes. "How? Where did you get this?" he stammered, his voice a strangled, unfamiliar sound. "The source is now our privileged work product," Marcus said, his voice dropping to the cold, clinical tone of a surgeon. "What matters is that we have the entire ledger. We have text messages corroborating the deliberate, fraudulent hiding of marital assets. Your client Richard has committed perjury on a scale that would make a hardened criminal blush. So we can discuss your offer, which is based on a fraudulent financial landscape, or we can discuss our new terms. Alternatively, I can walk this ledger over to the U.S. Attorney's Office this afternoon. I'm sure their white-collar crime division would be fascinated." Sterling looked from the paper to his client's imploding face and back again. The fight was gone. The shark had been harpooned. Marcus slid a new, thicker document across the table. "Our terms are not negotiable. My client will receive 60% of the total marital estate, both declared and as yet undeclared. We have a forensic accounting team ready to verify the ledger's contents. She will retain sole ownership of the Park Avenue penthouse and the Hamptons estate free and clear. The art collection is hers. Julian will be responsible for all tax liabilities arising from his creative accounting. Sign this today and the ledger remains a private matter between us. Hesitate, and it becomes a public record." It was total unconditional surrender. Julian was shaking his hands, trembling. He looked at Catherine, his eyes finally begging, searching for a trace of the woman he had married. The woman who had once loved him, forgiven his moods and propped up his ego. "Ellie, please," he breathed the name, a desperate plea. "Don't do this." Catherine leaned forward for the first time, her voice low, precise, and utterly devoid of pity. "Do what Julian Expose a liar, a thief, a man who would humiliate his wife and then abandon his pregnant mistress when she became inconvenient. No. I'm not doing anything to you. I am simply collecting on the debt you created. She paused, letting the words sink in. You toasted to your new beginning. It's only fair I get to start mine. Sign the papers. Defeated, broken, and utterly outplayed, Julian Croft picked up the heavy gold pen his lawyer offered him. His signature, once a bold, decisive slash, was now the barely legible scrawl of a beaten man. He signed away his empire, his reputation, and his power, all with a few strokes. Catherine stood without a word. She didn't look at the papers. She didn't look at Julian. Her business there was concluded. With Marcus at her side, she walked out of the conference room, leaving the architect of her misery to sit amongst the ruins of his own making. The war was over. She had won. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a cheating husband and a vengeful wife. It was a story about the masks we wear and the price of taking them off. Julian Croft built an empire on an image of invincibility, but it was a house of cards brought down by his own hubris. Catherine Vance wore the mask of the perfect passive wife until she was pushed too far. She discovered that her greatest strength wasn't her grace or her beauty, but the quiet, meticulous intelligence her husband had always overlooked. She didn't just get revenge. She got justice, reclaiming her narrative and her future. Her story is a powerful reminder that the most formidable power often lies not in shouting, but in planning, waiting, and knowing exactly when to strike. In the glittering world of New York's elite, where love is a commodity and secrets are currency, a fairy tale romance is about to be shattered. When a doting husband, a self-made millionaire, inexplicably cancels his pregnant wife's dream baby shower, he unknowingly ignites a firestorm of deception. His own mother, a woman with a will of iron and a heart of gold, steps in to right his wrongs. But in doing so, she unearths a betrayal so shocking it will tear their family apart. This isn't just a story about a canceled party. It's a tale of lies, manipulation, and the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's love. The September air in New York City carried the first crisp hint of autumn, a welcome reprieve from the sweltering summer. For Arabella Cartwright, however, the changing seasons were merely a backdrop to the blossoming new chapter of her own life. At 28, she was 7 months pregnant with her first child, a daughter, and married to a man who was by all accounts the city's most eligible bachelor, even after he was off the market. Remy Dunn was a name that echoed in the hallowed halls of Wall Street and graced the society pages with equal reverence. A tech mogul who had built his empire from the ground up. Remy was the kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he owned it. Their love story was one for the modern age, a whirlwind romance that had culminated in a lavish wedding at the Plaza Hotel a year prior. Arabella, a curator at a boutique art gallery, had been swept off her feet by Remy's charm, his ambition, and the disarming vulnerability she occasionally glimpsed beneath his polished exterior. He had promised her the world, and for a time it seemed he had delivered it on a silver platter. Their sprawling penthouse on the Upper East Side with its panoramic views of Central Park was a testament to his success, a gilded cage she had willingly stepped into. The baby shower was meant to be the pinnacle of their pre-parental bliss. Arabella had envisioned an elegant affair, a sophisticated luncheon at the iconic Rainbow Room, a place that held sentimental value for her. It was where her own parents had celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, a memory she cherished. She wanted to be surrounded by the genuine warmth of her closest friends and family, a celebration of new life that was both intimate and grand. Remy had initially been enthusiastic, or so it seemed. "Whatever you want, my love," he'd said, kissing her forehead, as they reviewed the plans with their event planner, a formidable woman named Genevieve. "Only the best for my girls." He had insisted on footing the entire bill, a gesture that at the time Arabella had found endearing. The budget was astronomical, but Remy had brushed off her concerns with a wave of his hand. "It's a drop in the ocean, Arabella. Our daughter deserves the world." The invitations, exquisite creations of ivory cardstock with rose gold calligraphy, had been sent out weeks in advance. The menu was a carefully curated selection of delicacies, the floral arrangements a breathtaking cascade of peonies and hydrangeas. Everything was perfect, a fairy tale brought to life. The first crack in the pristine facade appeared on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks before the scheduled event. Arabella was arranging a bouquet of fresh lilies in the foyer when Remy walked in, his face a mask of strained composure. He was usually the epitome of calm, his movements measured and deliberate. But today there was a frantic energy about him, a nervous twitch in his jaw that she had never seen before. "We need to talk," he said, his voice clipped. He loosened his tie, a gesture that in anyone else might have signaled relaxation, but in Remy it was a red flag. "Of course," Arabella replied, her heart giving a nervous flutter. "Is everything all right at work?" He led her into the living room, the vast expanse of glass offering a stunning, almost surreal view of the city below. He didn't sit but paced in front of the fireplace, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his tailored trousers. "It's about the baby shower," he began, and Arabella's stomach clenched. "I'm afraid we have to cancel it." The words hung in the air, sharp and dissonant, like a shattered pane of glass. Arabella stared at him, convinced she had misheard. "Cancel it? Remy, what are you talking about? Everything is booked. The invitations are out." "I know, darling, and I'm so sorry," he said, finally stopping to look at her. But his eyes, usually a warm, reassuring brown, were distant, evasive. "Something's come up. A business deal, a massive one. It's happening in Singapore, and the timing it's just impossible. I have to be there." Arabella's mind reeled. A business deal? Important enough to cancel their daughter's baby shower. But can't you postpone the trip or go after the shower? It's just one afternoon, Remy. "It's not that simple," he insisted, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "This has been in the works for months. The final negotiations are happening that same weekend. If I'm not there, the deal falls through. We're talking about a 9-figure acquisition, Arabella. It's crucial for the company." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. It wasn't just about the party, the money, or the elaborate plans. It was about the gesture, the symbolism. It was about him choosing work over this milestone, over her, over their daughter. "So that's it. You're just canceling it without even discussing it with me." "I am discussing it with you," he said, his tone softening as he saw her distress. He moved to her side, wrapping his arms around her. But his embrace felt hollow, a perfunctory gesture rather than a comforting one. "Listen, we'll do something else when I get back. Something even bigger, I promise. A welcome home party for the baby that will put this shower to shame." Arabella wanted to believe him, to find solace in his words. But a cold knot of doubt was forming in her gut. Something felt off, a discordant note in the carefully composed symphony of their life. His explanation was plausible, yes. Remy was a man driven by his work. But this felt different. It felt rehearsed. Over the next few days, a chilling sense of unease settled over her. Remy was apologetic, showering her with gifts, a diamond tennis bracelet, a limited edition handbag, as if to fill the void left by the canceled celebration. He made the calls himself to Genevieve, the event planner, to the Rainbow Room. His voice a smooth, apologetic murmur as he dismantled the event piece by piece. He even drafted a carefully worded email to their guests, citing unforeseen and unavoidable business obligations. Arabella tried to push her suspicions aside, blaming them on pregnancy hormones, on her own disappointment. But the questions kept swirling in her mind. Why couldn't he have told her about this trip sooner? Why the sudden last-minute cancellation? And why, when she tried to talk about it, did he become so defensive, his answers so vague? The person who seemed most unfazed by the cancellation, much to Arabella's surprise, was her mother-in-law, Bellamy Dunn. Bellamy was a formidable woman, the matriarch of a family that had seen its share of ups and downs. A widow for over a decade, she had raised Remy on her own, instilling in him the fierce ambition that had propelled him to success. She was a woman of impeccable taste and unshakable resolve, her silver hair always perfectly coiffed, her designer suits a testament to her enduring elegance. Arabella had always had a good relationship with Bellamy, a respectful, if not overly close bond. She admired the older woman's strength, her sharp wit, and her unwavering devotion to her son. When Arabella called her to break the news about the baby shower expecting sympathy, or perhaps even a stern word for Remy Bellamy's reaction, was surprisingly calm. "Men can be fools, my dear," she had said, her voice a soothing balm over the phone. "Especially when they have more money than sense. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. The most important thing is you and that precious baby girl." Arabella, desperate for an ally, had poured out her heart to her mother-in-law, voicing her doubts, her hurt, her nagging feeling that something was amiss. Bellamy listened patiently, her silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line. "Remy has always been intense about his work," Bellamy said carefully. "It's what's made him who he is. But you're right to be hurt, Arabella. A baby shower is a special moment, a rite of passage. It's not something to be cast aside for a business meeting, no matter how important." A few days later, Bellamy called Arabella with a proposition. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice imbued with a newfound energy, "and I refuse to let my granddaughter's arrival go uncelebrated. If Remy is too busy to throw you a party, then I will." Arabella was taken aback. "Bellamy, you don't have to do that. It's too much trouble." "Nonsense," Bellamy declared. "It would be my absolute pleasure. And we'll do it right. No stuffy luncheons or pretentious venues. We'll have it at my estate in the Hamptons. A beautiful garden party, relaxed and elegant. What do you say?" The offer was a lifeline, a glimmer of light in the darkness that had descended upon her. The Hamptons estate, a magnificent property that had been in the Dunn family for generations, was a place of happy memories for Arabella. She and Remy had spent a magical weekend there shortly after they started dating. I don't know what to say," Arabella stammered, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Say yes," Bellamy urged. "Let me do this for you, for my granddaughter, and we'll keep it a surprise for everyone. Let them think the celebration is off. It will be our little secret." The idea of a secret celebration, a quiet act of defiance against Remy's cold dismissal, appealed to Arabella's bruised heart. It was a chance to reclaim a piece of her stolen joy, to create a happy memory that was hers and hers alone. She agreed, her spirit lifting for the first time in weeks. Bellamy, true to her word, took charge with military precision. She was a whirlwind of activity, her calls and emails a flurry of arrangements. She hired a new event planner, a rising star named Isabel, who specialized in bespoke, intimate gatherings. The guest list was revised, pared down to their closest circle of friends and family, the ones who had offered genuine support and concern when they heard of the cancellation. As the days turned into weeks, Arabella found herself caught up in the excitement of the secret plan. She and Bellamy would have clandestine meetings at a quiet tea room on Madison Avenue, poring over fabric swatches and cake designs. Bellamy was a woman of impeccable taste. Her vision for the party, a perfect blend of sophistication and whimsy. She was creating a wonderland, a magical escape from the harsh realities of Arabella's life. But even as the new plans took shape, the shadow of Remy's deception loomed large. His trip to Singapore was fast approaching, and his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He was distant, preoccupied, his phone perpetually buzzing with calls and messages that he would take in another room, his voice a low, urgent murmur. When Arabella asked about the deal, his answers were evasive, couched in vague business jargon that meant nothing to her. The night before he was due to leave, Arabella tried one last time to break through the wall he had built around himself. They were lying in bed, the city lights twinkling like fallen stars outside their window. "I'm going to miss you," she said softly, tracing the outline of his jaw with her finger. "I'll miss you too." He replied, his voice thick with a strange, unreadable emotion. He pulled her closer, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "I'll be back before you know it, and I'll make this up to you, I swear." But his words, meant to be reassuring, only amplified the sense of dread that had taken root in her heart. She felt a sudden, visceral urge to tell him about Bellamy's party to shatter the secret they were keeping from him. But something held her back. A primal instinct, a whisper of self-preservation that told her to keep this one thing for herself, to hold on to this small pocket of joy that was untainted by his lies. As she watched his plane ascend into the pre-dawn sky the next morning, a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was a tear of sadness, of confusion, but also of a burgeoning strength she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer just Remy Dunn's wife, a beautiful accessory to his successful life. She was a mother-to-be, a woman on the verge of a profound transformation. And she was about to discover that the fairy tale she had been living was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion, one that was about to come crashing down in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The real drama, she was beginning to understand, had only just begun. The Blacktown car purred along the Long Island Expressway, leaving the relentless energy of Manhattan in its wake. Arabella stared out the window, the urban landscape gradually giving way to the manicured lawns and stately homes of the Hamptons. Beside her, Bellamy Dunn was the picture of serene confidence, her fingers tapping out a message on her phone, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Isabel has outdone herself," Bellamy said, tucking her phone into her Chanel bag. "She just sent me a photo of the marquee." "It's breathtaking." Arabella managed a weak smile. "I can't thank you enough for this, Bellamy." "Really? Nonsense, dear. Family takes care of family." And today, she declared, her eyes twinkling with a mischievous light, we celebrate. The Dunn estate, a sprawling shingle-style mansion overlooking the Atlantic, was even more beautiful than Arabella remembered. As they pulled up the long gravel driveway, she could see the marquee Bellamy had mentioned, a magnificent structure of white canvas and twinkling fairy lights, set up on the vast back lawn. The air was filled with the scent of salt and roses, and the distant sound of a string quartet warming up. It was everything Remy's party was meant to be, and yet it felt entirely different. There was a genuine warmth here, an intimacy that had been absent from the cold corporate grandeur of the Rainbow Room. Isabel, the event planner, a chic woman with a warm smile, greeted them at the door. "Everything is perfect, Mrs. Dunn," she said, her gaze shifting to Arabella. "Congratulations, you look absolutely radiant." Arabella, dressed in a flowing lavender gown that Bellamy had insisted on buying for her, felt a blush creep up her cheeks. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly beautiful, celebrated. The house was filled with their closest friends and family, Arabella's parents who had flown in from Connecticut, her sister Chloe, who had been her rock through the whole ordeal, and a small circle of friends who had known her long before she became Mrs. Remy Dunn. There were no society reporters here, no business associates of Remy's looking to network. Just love, genuine and unconditional. As her mother hugged her, tears in her eyes, Arabella felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees. This was what she had wanted all along. The afternoon unfolded like a dream. The sun shone brightly, the champagne flowed sparkling cider for Arabella, and the air was filled with laughter and happy chatter. Her friends showered her with thoughtful personal gifts, a stark contrast to the extravagant impersonal offerings that had likely been purchased by Remy's assistants for the original shower. But even in this idyllic setting, the architect of her recent misery was never far from her thoughts. Remy. Where was he now? In a sterile boardroom in Singapore, closing the deal of a lifetime. Did he feel even a pang of regret for what he was missing? The first discordant note in the day's perfect harmony came from her sister Chloe. She pulled Arabella aside near a fountain overflowing with white petals, her brow furrowed with concern. "Have you heard from Remy?" Chloe asked, her voice low. "He called from the airport yesterday," Arabella replied, "and he sent a text this morning saying he'd landed safely." "Why?" Chloe hesitated, biting her lip. "It's probably nothing, but my friend Sarah, the one who works for British Airways. She was working the first-class lounge at JFK yesterday morning." Arabella's heart, which had been feeling so light just moments before, began to thud heavily against her ribs. and she saw Remy. Chloe said, her eyes filled with apology. He wasn't alone, Arabella. He was with a woman. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A woman. What did she look like? Arabella asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah said she was tall, blonde, very polished. Chloe struggled for the right words. She said they looked cozy. They were holding hands, Arabella, and she was sure it was the Singapore flight they were boarding. The blood drained from Arabella's face. A business trip. A 9-figure acquisition. The lies so plausible, so carefully constructed, now seemed laughably transparent. The distant, preoccupied behavior, the hushed phone calls, the evasiveness, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Did she happen to catch the woman's name? Arabella asked, her voice trembling. Chloe shook her head. I'm so sorry, Ames. I didn't want to ruin your day, but I couldn't not tell you. Arabella felt a strange, chilling calm settle over her. The hurt was there, a raw, gaping wound in her chest. But beneath it was a cold, hard anger. He hadn't just canceled their baby shower. He had canceled it to go on a romantic getaway with another woman. He had lied to her, manipulated her, and made her feel like she was going crazy for doubting him. She excused herself, retreating to a secluded part of the garden that overlooked the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, a relentless roaring rhythm that mirrored the turmoil in her soul. She took deep, shuddering breaths, her hands protectively cradling her belly. Her daughter. He had done this to their daughter too. It was Bellamy who found her there, her face a mask of concern. Arabella. My dear, what is it? You look as if you've seen a ghost. The dam broke. The tears she had been holding back streamed down her face as she told her mother-in-law everything, Chloe's story. The woman at the airport. The sickening realization of Remy's betrayal. Bellamy listened in silence, her expression hardening with each word. The serene, elegant matriarch was gone, replaced by a woman of steel, her eyes blazing with a cold fury that startled Arabella. When Arabella had finished, her voice hoarse with sobs, Bellamy placed a comforting hand on her arm, but her voice when she spoke was laced with ice. That absolute fool, she seethed, her voice a low, dangerous growl. I knew something was wrong. I felt it in my bones. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with a speed that belied her age. There's a private investigator I've used in the past. For business matters. He's discreet, and he's the best. His name is David Chen. I'm hiring him. Now. What are you going to do? Arabella asked, wiping her eyes. I'm going to find out who this woman is, Bellamy said, her voice grim. And I'm going to find out exactly what my son is doing in Singapore. And then she looked at Arabella, her eyes softening for a moment. We are going to make him pay. The rest of the party passed in a blur for Arabella. She went through the motions, opening gifts, smiling for photos. But her mind was a million miles away, lost in a maelstrom of betrayal and heartbreak. Bellamy, however, was a master of deception. She returned to the party as if nothing had happened, her charm and grace unwavering. No one would have guessed the storm that was brewing beneath her placid surface. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed, Arabella sat with Bellamy and her own parents in the grand living room of the estate. The fire crackled in the hearth, a stark contrast to the chilling conversation that was taking place. Arabella had told her parents everything, and their shock had quickly turned to a protective rage. I'm going to kill him, her father, a gentle, unassuming man, had said, his voice shaking with anger. It was Bellamy who took control, her voice calm and measured. Anger is a luxury we can't afford right now, she said, her gaze steady. We need a plan. We need to be smart. Her phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen. That was David Chen. He's already on it. He has a contact at the airline. He's trying to get the passenger manifest for that flight. A few hours later, as Arabella was trying and failing to get some sleep in one of the lavish guest rooms, Bellamy knocked softly on her door. She was holding a tablet, her face grim in the soft glow of the screen. "He got it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. David found her. She handed the tablet to Arabella. On the screen was a photo of the woman from the airport captured by CCTV footage that David had somehow managed to obtain. She was tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed, just as Chloe's friend had described. But it was the name on the file that made Arabella's blood run cold. Laura Vance. The name was sickeningly familiar. Laura Vance was a rival tech entrepreneur, a rising star in Silicon Valley, who had been making headlines for her aggressive business tactics and her stunning looks. She was Remy's direct competitor, their companies locked in a fierce battle for market share. Arabella had met her once at a charity gala. She remembered Laura's cool, appraising gaze, the way she had looked at Remy with an intimacy that had made Arabella uncomfortable even then. "They're not in Singapore for a business deal," Arabella said, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with horrifying clarity. "They're there, together. It gets worse," Bellamy said, her voice strained. She scrolled down the page, revealing hotel booking confirmations. They weren't staying in separate rooms in a business hotel. They were sharing a suite, the presidential suite at the Marina Bay Sands, one of the most romantic and luxurious hotels in the world. And David's preliminary financial investigation had revealed something even more shocking. Remy had recently transferred a significant amount of company stock, millions of dollars worth, into a private holding company. A company that was registered in the Cayman Islands. A company that listed Laura Vance as a majority shareholder. It wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal on a scale that Arabella could barely comprehend. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was potentially sabotaging his own company, the empire he had built from scratch. For what? For Laura Vance. "What is he doing?" Arabella whispered, her mind reeling from the sheer magnitude of his deception. Bellamy's face was a study in grim determination. "I don't know," she said, "but I intend to find out. And when Remy gets back from his little trip, he's not going to know what hit him." The beautiful sun-drenched day that had started with so much promise had ended in the cold, harsh reality of a nightmare. The gilded cage had been shattered, and Arabella was left standing in the ruins, her heart broken, her future uncertain. But as she looked at the fierce, protective woman beside her, she knew one thing for sure. She was not alone in this fight, and the wrath of a woman scorned was nothing compared to the fury of a mother and a mother-in-law united in their quest for justice. The unraveling had begun, and it was about to get a whole lot messier. The week that followed was the longest of Arabella's life. On the surface, she maintained a facade of normalcy. She returned to her penthouse, the opulent space now feeling cold and alien. She spoke to Remy on the phone each day, her voice a carefully calibrated mix of wifely affection and mild disappointment, a performance that deserved an Oscar. Each lie he told, every casual mention of a grueling negotiation or a late-night meeting, was a fresh stab to her already wounded heart. She would end each call and immediately relay the details to Bellamy, who was compiling a dossier of his deceit with the meticulousness of a seasoned prosecutor. Bellamy, for her part, had transformed into a veritable commander-in-chief. Her Hamptons estate had become their war room, a hub of quiet, relentless activity. David Chen, the private investigator, was proving to be worth every penny of his exorbitant fee. He was a ghost, a digital phantom, who moved through the labyrinthine world of offshore accounts and corporate espionage with terrifying efficiency. He had unearthed the full extent of Remy's financial entanglement with Laura Vance. It wasn't just a transfer of stock. Remy had been systematically funneling money into Laura's company, propping up his own competitor in a move that defied all business logic. He was sabotaging himself, bleeding his own empire dry. "It makes no sense," Arabella had said, staring at the complex flowcharts David had prepared. "Why would he destroy everything he's worked for?" "There are two things that make powerful men do stupid things," my dear Bellamy had replied, her voice laced with a weary cynicism. "Ego and obsession. And it appears my son is suffering from a terminal case of both." The final piece of the puzzle arrived via a secured email from David Chin 4 days after the baby shower. It was a short, grainy video clip covertly filmed by one of David's contacts in Singapore. The footage showed the interior of a high-end restaurant. At a secluded table, Remy and Lara were seated opposite each other. They were holding hands across the table, their heads close together. But it wasn't the intimacy that was shocking. It was the document they were signing. David had managed to get a surprisingly clear shot of the paperwork. It was a prenuptial agreement. Arabella felt the air leave her lungs. A prenup. He was planning to marry Lara Vance. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her entire marriage, their life together, their unborn child. It was all a sham, a placeholder until he could be with the woman he truly wanted. The canceled baby shower wasn't just an excuse for a trip. It was a calculated step in his plan to exit their marriage. He had needed to be out of the country away from her to finalize his future with someone else. The video continued. After signing the papers, Remy had reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He had opened it to reveal a diamond ring, a gaudy, ostentatious thing that dwarfed the elegant classic diamond he had given Arabella. Lara had gasped, her face illuminated by the flash of the enormous stone. She had kissed him then, a long, passionate kiss that made Arabella's stomach churn. She couldn't watch any more. She slammed the laptop shut, a strangled sob escaping her lips. This was a level of betrayal so profound, so monstrous, that it defied comprehension. The bastard Bellamy whispered, her face pale. For the first time, Arabella saw a flicker of pain in the older woman's eyes, the deep personal hurt of a mother who has discovered her son is a stranger. But it was quickly replaced by that familiar, steely resolve. "This changes everything," Bellamy said, her voice low and dangerous. "This is no longer just about infidelity. This is about fraud. Bigamy, practically. He's planning to leave you, Arabella. And he's trying to hide his assets to ensure you and your daughter get nothing." A cold, righteous fury began to burn through Arabella's grief. He was going to discard her like she was nothing. He was going to abandon his own child. The image of his hand on her pregnant belly, the memory of his promises to make it up to her now, seemed like a grotesque mockery. "What do we do?" Arabella asked, her voice shaking but firm. "We fight," Bellamy declared. "But not in a courtroom, not yet. A public, messy divorce is what he would expect. It would get dragged out for years and he would use his money and his power to crush you. No, we are going to be smarter. We are going to hit him where he is most vulnerable." His company. Precisely, Bellamy confirmed. Remy's entire identity is tied up in Dunn Enterprises. His reputation, his power, his ego, it all stems from that glass tower on Wall Street. We are going to expose him, not just as a cheating husband, but as a fraudulent, incompetent CEO who is actively sabotaging his own company for a woman. The plan they hatched was audacious, a high-stakes corporate power play that would have made Remy himself proud. Bellamy, it turned out, was not just a society matriarch. Her late husband had left her a significant non-controlling stake in Dunn Enterprises, a fact that Remy, in his arrogance, had largely overlooked. For years she had been a silent partner, but she had a seat on the board, and more importantly, she had the respect of the other board members, old money stalwarts who had known her family for decades. Their first move was to quietly reach out to these board members, men and women who were already growing concerned about the company's erratic performance and Remy's increasingly secretive behavior. Bellamy, with Arabella by her side, arranged a series of discreet meetings in the private rooms of exclusive city clubs. Arabella at first had been nervous. What could she, an art curator, possibly contribute to these high-powered meetings? But Bellamy had insisted. "They need to see you," she had said. "They need to see the woman he has betrayed. They need to see the mother of his child. Your presence is more powerful than any financial statement." And she was right. As Arabella, her pregnancy now beautifully apparent, sat in on these meetings, she didn't have to say a word. Her quiet dignity, her visible pain spoke volumes. Bellamy would lay out the evidence David Chen had gathered: the stock transfers, the offshore accounts, the proof of Remy's financial entanglement with a direct competitor. She didn't reveal the details of the affair, framing it instead as a case of extreme and bafflingly poor judgment that was putting the entire company at risk. The board was horrified. Remy, the golden boy, the visionary leader, was acting like a reckless fool. His loyalty, which had once been solely to his company, was now compromised. The tide was turning. The whispers of a no-confidence vote began to circulate. But they needed a final, undeniable piece of evidence, a smoking gun that would leave no room for doubt. It was during this tense period of plotting and waiting that an unexpected ally emerged. A woman named Sophia Rossi, Remy's long-suffering executive assistant. Sophia was a sharp, fiercely competent woman in her late 40s who had been with Remy since the beginning. She had seen the company grow from a tiny startup to a global powerhouse, and her loyalty to Dunn Enterprises was absolute. Bellamy, sensing a potential ally, had invited Sophia for lunch under the guise of discussing Remy's schedule. Over salads at a quiet restaurant, Bellamy had carefully broached the subject of the company's recent troubles. Sophia, a woman who was normally the soul of discretion, surprised them both. Her composure cracked and her frustration poured out. She spoke of Remy's recent erratic behavior, his inexplicable and secretive trips, his new obsession with Laura Vance, whom Sophia clearly despised. "He's not the man I used to work for," Sophia confided, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "He's arrogant, dismissive. He's lying to everyone, including the board, and he's running this company into the ground." Seeing an opening, Bellamy took a gamble. She told Sophia everything. She showed her the evidence of the financial fraud, the photos of Remy and Laura, even the video of the proposal. Sophia's face went white with shock, which quickly morphed into a furious, resolute anger. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew he was lying. The Singapore deal, he made me book the flights. And the hotel, the presidential suite. He told me it was to impress the investors." Her eyes hardened. "He's a fool. And he's going to destroy everything we built." That afternoon, Sophia Rossi made a decision. Her loyalty was not to Remy Dunn the man, but to Dunn Enterprises, the company she had dedicated her life to. She became their inside woman, their spy in the enemy camp. She gave them the final piece of the puzzle they needed. Remy, in his hubris, had drafted a memorandum of understanding with Laura Vance's company. It was essentially a merger agreement, but one that was shockingly disadvantageous to Dunn Enterprises. It would give Laura's company access to Dunn's proprietary technology and client lists, effectively handing over the keys to the kingdom. He was planning to present it at a specially convened board meeting the day after he returned from Singapore. He believed he had enough support to push it through, and once it was signed, he would announce his engagement to Laura and file for divorce from Arabella. It was his endgame. "He's kept the only copy on a password-protected drive in his office safe," Sophia told them. "But I know the password. He uses the same one for everything. The name of his first dog, Barnaby." The plan was set. The night before Remy was due to return, Sophia would access the safe, download the memorandum, and email it to Bellamy. Bellamy would then forward it to the entire board along with a formal request for an emergency meeting to discuss the immediate removal of Remy Dunn as CEO. As the day of Remy's return dawned, a nervous electric energy filled the air. Arabella felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. The life she had known was about to be obliterated, and what would rise from the ashes was terrifyingly uncertain. But as she stood in her apartment looking out at the city that had once seemed so full of promise, she felt not fear but a sense of calm resolve. She had been a victim, but now she was a warrior, and she was ready for the fight. The final showdown was no longer a matter of if, but when, and it was going to be spectacular. The day of Remy's return was a study in orchestrated calm. Arabella spent the morning at a prenatal yoga class, a picture of serenity that belied the storm raging within her. She moved through the poses, her breath steady, her focus absolute. She was no longer the fragile, heartbroken woman who had wept in the Hamptons garden. She was a woman on the brink of battle, her mind clear, her purpose unwavering. Remy's flight was scheduled to land at JFK at 3:00 p.m. At 3:15, as his town car was likely speeding towards Manhattan, Bellamy Dunn pressed send. An email with the subject line, "Urgent Emergency Board Meeting," regarding the future of Dunn Enterprises was dispatched to every member of the board. Attached was the damning memorandum of understanding, a clear and irrefutable blueprint of Remy's betrayal. The email also contained a concise, scathingly professional summary of his financial malfeasance compiled by David Chen and vetted by a team of forensic accountants Bellamy had hired. There was no mention of his affair, no hint of the personal drama. This was a corporate execution, clean and precise. The email concluded with a formal motion co-sponsored by Bellamy Dunn and two of the most influential board members to convene at 9:00 a.m. the following morning to vote on the immediate termination of Remy Dunn's contract as CEO, citing gross misconduct and dereliction of fiduciary duty. The fallout was instantaneous. A flurry of reply-all emails confirmed the board's unanimous assent. The trap was set. Arabella was waiting for him when he walked into the penthouse. He looked tanned and relaxed, the picture of a man who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. He dropped his briefcase, a triumphant smile on his face, and moved to embrace her. "I'm back, my love," he said, his voice smooth as silk. Arabella allowed the embrace, her body stiff, her heart a block of ice. "Welcome home, Remy," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. He pulled back, his smile faltering as he registered her coldness for the first time. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it the baby?" "The baby is fine," she said, stepping away from him. "I, however, am not." A flicker of confusion, then annoyance crossed his face. "Arabella, don't be like this. I told you I'd make it up to you. The trip was a massive success. I'm about to close a merger that will double the company's value." "A merger with Laura Vance?" Arabella asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The color drained from Remy's face. He stared at her, his mouth slightly agape, the confident facade crumbling to reveal the panicked man beneath. How do you know that name?" "Oh, I know a lot of things, Remy," she said, a bitter smile touching her lips. "I know you didn't go to Singapore for a 9-figure acquisition. I know you went there for a romantic getaway with your mistress. I know you canceled our daughter's baby shower so you could propose to her. I have the video, by the way." The restaurant lighting was quite flattering. Remy staggered back as if she had physically struck him. He looked around the room, his eyes wild as if searching for an escape route. "Arabella, I can explain." "Can you?" She interrupted, her voice rising with the fury she had suppressed for so long. "Can you explain the millions of dollars of company funds you funneled into her business? Can you explain the prenuptial agreement you signed with her? Can you explain how you were planning to announce your new engagement the day after you divorced me, leaving your pregnant wife and your own child with nothing?" Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the last remnants of his composure. He was speechless. His lies exposed his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. It was then that his phone began to buzz incessantly. He glanced at the screen, his eyes widening in horror. It was his work phone. The board members, the executives. The deluge of emails and messages had begun. He was being summoned. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Me?" Arabella laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "I didn't do anything, Remy. You did this. You underestimated me. You underestimated your mother. You thought we were just women accessories to your brilliant life. You were wrong." He sank onto one of the expensive white sofas, his head in his hands. The self-made millionaire, the titan of Wall Street, looked like a broken man. The empire he had built on ambition and deceit was about to be taken from him. "My mother," he croaked. "She's in on this." "She led the charge," Arabella said, taking a grim satisfaction in his despair. "She's the one who called the emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. You should probably prepare a speech, though I doubt it will do you any good." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "Arabella, please." We can fix this. Don't let them do this to me. I'll give you anything you want. The penthouse a settlement. Just call it off. It was pathetic. The man who had been ready to discard her without a second thought was now begging for her help. What I want, Remy, she said, her voice cold and final, is a divorce. I want you out of my life and out of my daughter's life. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow with the terms, and they will be non-negotiable. She turned and walked towards the bedroom, leaving him sitting amidst the ruins of his life. She packed a bag, her movements calm and deliberate. She was leaving the gilded cage for good. As she walked past him on her way to the door, she paused. By the way, she said, looking down at him, my mother-in-law threw me a baby shower. While you were in Singapore proposing to your mistress. It was at the Hamptons estate. It was beautiful. All our real friends and family were there. We didn't miss you at all. She saw the final flicker of hope die in his eyes. It was a cruel final twist of the knife, and she didn't regret it for a second. She walked out of the penthouse and didn't look back. The board meeting the next morning was by all accounts a bloodbath. Remy, disheveled and defeated, had tried to defend himself, but the evidence was overwhelming. The vote was unanimous. He was stripped of his title, his power, and his office, escorted from the building by security like a common criminal. The board, in a move of strategic genius, appointed Bellamy Dunn as interim CEO, a decision that was met with overwhelming support from investors and employees alike. The matriarch had reclaimed her son's throne. The divorce was swift and brutal. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud and adultery, Remy had no choice but to accept Arabella's terms. She got the penthouse a financial settlement that would ensure she and her daughter were secure for life, and most importantly, she got sole custody. Remy was granted limited supervised visitation rights, a humiliating blow for a man whose ego was his most prized possession. Laura Vance, seeing that her golden goose had been cooked, disappeared from the scene as quickly as she had appeared, the sham merger agreement null and void. The last Arabella heard, she was facing her own shareholder lawsuits. 2 months later, Arabella gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl. She named her Bellamy. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The gilded cage was replaced by a warm, loving home. Arabella sold the penthouse, finding a charming brownstone in a family-friendly neighborhood. She went back to work at the gallery, her passion for art rekindled. Her daughter was her world, a constant source of joy and wonder. Bellamy Dunn, the formidable CEO, proved to be an even more formidable grandmother. She doted on her granddaughter, her love a fierce protective shield. The alliance forged in betrayal had softened into a deep, abiding friendship. They were an unconventional family, 2 strong women and a baby girl bound together by the shared experience of having loved and lost the same man. Remy became a ghost in their lives, a cautionary tale. He faded from the society pages, a fallen star. Arabella would sometimes hear whispers of his attempts to start a new company, but he was a pariah in the business world, a man whose reputation was irrevocably tarnished. He had lost everything. His company, his fortune, his family, all for a fleeting obsession. He had canceled a baby shower, and in doing so, he had canceled his own life. Arabella had learned a hard lesson. She had learned that fairy tales can be built on foundations of lies and that Prince Charming can be a villain in disguise. But she had also learned that she was stronger than she ever thought possible. She had found her own power, her own voice, and in the end, she had gotten something far more valuable than a millionaire husband or a lavish party. She had gotten her freedom, her self-respect, and a love in her daughter that was real and true and unconditional. And that was a happily ever after that no amount of money could buy. The story of Arabella Dunn is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest betrayals can lead to the most profound liberations. It's a testament to the strength of a woman who refused to be a victim and the fierce loyalty of a mother who would move heaven and earth for her family. If this story of deception, resilience, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up to show your support. Don't forget to share it with someone who loves a story of sweet, sweet revenge. And for more gripping real-life dramas that will have you on the edge of your seat, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we have in store. Thank you for listening.